Welcome to DevRelevant. I'm your host, Danny Mulvihill. In this show, we explore tools and topics in the tech scene through the lens of developers, engineers, and DevRels. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the DevRelevant podcast. Today, my guest is Steve Simkins, who is the head of developer relations at Kenyatta. So today, we're obviously going to be talking about Kenyatta and IPFS. And then the second half of the show, we'll get more into DevRel topics, which is going to be kind of the concept moving forward. So, Steve, thanks for your time. Welcome, and let's dig in.
Yeah, thanks so much, Danny, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Sweet. So let me pull up my notes here so I can get right into the questions. Here's actually where I'd like to start is I think yesterday I posted about this project called Cosmic Cowboys. And so this isn't so much IPFS specifically related, but I'd like to hear more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Cosmic Cowboys has been a really fun project. It's kind of like our Kenyatta's little side project. Basically, a coworker that works at, Kenyatta, she was like, hey, we should compete in ETH, online.
Yeah.
And we'll get Justin too. And so it was me, Justin, Marge, and over the course of time, we've been really interested in ERC-6551, which is the concept of NFTs having their own kind of wallet / account. And so you can kind of nest, ownership, which is a really interesting concept. And we've thought about before too, like what that looks like with NPCs. Traditionally NPCs might have some AI influence in like gaming and help kind of fill things. But if you add in the wallet aspect, you have almost like this financial level or just on-chain level, which is really interesting. And so that's kind of where this concept started. And so for ETH Online, we hacked for about a month and we built Cosmic Cowboys. And it's essentially a proof of concept that you can have a blockchain game that has characters or NPCs that are ERC-721 NFTs, and then they have their own wallet, and so they get to have in-game assets such as currency, food items, supplies, stuff like that. And with the help of AI, you can do kind of like a chat with them and use embeddings to give context to what they have or their surroundings or all this different stuff. And so you're able to have like a really cool solution to a cold start problem. A lot of times when you go into metaverse worlds or game worlds that are like large, RPGs, MMORPGs, you get in there and there's just no one to talk to. And you're like, that's the whole point of the game. This is a world where it's like you can have like lots of people to talk to, but also you can spur them to make on-chain decisions that influence or change the course of the game. And so the way we have it set up is, we're using OpenAI to handle a lot of the AI stuff, not with just chat, but also with function calls. And so we basically have a thing set up where we're like, hey, when we press this trigger, you have to make a decision. Here's your list of options. Based on your stuff, just pick one.
Nice.
And we do that on a cron job. And so by doing so, you basically have like this history of a game that's happening and things are changing even if you're not there.
Wow. Nice.
And so that's the main concept of the game. And it's kind of evolved from, kind of winning that hackathon at ETH Online to migrating to a game that we've kind of built ourselves as a proof of concept for an NPC engine. So our goal is to see, can we make a viable product for developers, game developers, blockchain game developers specifically. They can use this to make their own NPCs that have on-chain logic and all this kind of stuff. So,
yeah. I'm glad you brought up 6551 because I think it's a super interesting concept, and it, especially in the context of games for Web3, because like it's so obvious to think of your avatar, your character in a game as an ERC-721, but then having to, trade all of your or manage all of your other assets in the game, whether it's the currency or items or whatever the case may be, those being able to be owned by the character just feels so natural that I love the idea of it. But I haven't dug into it enough to know the details. So maybe, and it sounds like you have, is 6551 just sort of are you giving it a ERC-4337 smart contract wallet, or is it different in some way? Or if you could talk through in a little bit more depth.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It is similar. It's not exactly 4337. I think it takes some concepts of it, but these, they're called token bound accounts is the name for them. They are smart contract accounts. And so that is some of the limitations behind them. And I think maybe the same applies to 4337. I'm not sure. But the problem a little bit is that it gives them like an address, like a front facing address where like assets actually go, and like it's underneath that NFT.
Yeah.
But the tricky bit is that when it comes to signing the private key, that still goes up to the parent.
Right.
So if I have wallet 1 that owns NFT and then NFT owns that wallet, if that wallet's going to interact and sign with stuff, like it has to come from the private key up the chain.
Totally.
But it's similar, but it's still a little bit of its own thing and has a lot of interesting concepts. Yeah,
I definitely want to dig into it more. And so then the other question about Cosmic Cowboys specifically is that the NPCs are actually these 721s with a token bound account. And I was reading through the website a little bit, and it sounds like if I can help one of these miners get off the planet, then I sort of own that NPC now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And
yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
As of now, there's 300 miners, right?
Yeah. There's a lot. I think since we opened up our public beta, it's probably dwindled a bit.
Sure.
But another kind of concept we kind of played with a bit is this idea of a gamified mint. And so we are trying to find like ways of incentive for like people to play the game. Like, why would you play it? Why would you do this?
Sure.
And so the idea is like, let's say, instead like a normal 300 NFT drop where it's first come, first serve, or you get on some kind of allow list. Instead of that, it's like, no, you have to play this game. And if you play fast enough, you might be able to get one.
Yeah. That's cool.
So the way it works in the game is you go into the game and you can basically talk with them if you want to, but then you can also make them make decisions. So like earning different things, and each one of those you can get an achievement. And if you get all the achievements, you can use that to get, what's called like a planet jumper, which is like someone who can jump down to the planet and rescue miner, complete a few more tasks. There's like a little task list. You do that. Then you can, pull them out. And then that's when they're rescued. They're basically, transferred to your wallet. And at that point, they're also taken out of the game. Right. And so there's less left, So that's the concept there, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. I started messing with it a little bit yesterday and got taken away from it, but I want to play with it a little bit more because I started playing Pirate Nation. I don't know, a month or something ago.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool, man. It's fun. I recommend checking it out. I think you still have to get a code to get Pirate, but I could probably get one. I
don't remember. Is that proof of play?
Yeah, exactly.
That makes that.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's where I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun, man. I like it. All right, so let's jump into Kenyatta and IPFS. The first place I want to start is, so I work at CrossMint and we're very focused on NFTs. And so I've always only thought of IPFS in the context of NFTs. And just looking through the docs, I noticed that it says, you can use it for NFTs, of course, and then even DeFi and Web3 gaming. So I was curious if you could talk through some of the other ways that IPFS can be used.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think something important to like have in context of IPFS and like that notion is IPFS is designed to have a immutable and verifiable way of doing off-chain storage. The classic example that you see a lot of the time is, and it's easier to picture with NFTs because there's like a monetary value there. But if you have data that's too large to store directly on the blockchain, you have to do a pointer somewhere off, chain. And there's a lot of options out there. So you could do a centralized server, but the problem with that is that it can be altered. It can be, manipulated. And that's what was happening really early on in NFTs, which is really interesting. And then you could also do something like IPFS. And the power of IPFS is that it allows content addressing and portability and mutability. So what's happening there is when you upload a file to IPFS, it's getting its own unique CID that's cryptographically based on the contents of that file. And so that means is if you keep uploading it, you'll get the same CID every time. If you change one pixel or one bit, then you get a different CID at that point. And it both serves as like a way to verify like this content is what it says it is, but also as a way to locate it on the network. And that's the addressability part. And then the way that content is stored on the network is you have IPFS nodes where one IPFS node will pin something and say, here is a CID, here's the address. If you want it, come get it. Mm-hmm. As people make requests from other IPFS nodes, the content travels from node to node and is kind of cached on those nodes.
Right.
And that cache will stay there until the file is unpinned. Because what happens is those nodes are like, hey, I'm getting really full. I got a lot of cache, like how you clear your browser cache. It's like, I really need to clear this out. But how do I determine what do I clear? Do I clear everything or do I keep the important stuff? And whatever's pinned, if there's at least one thing, one node pinning something that says, no, keep this cached and keep it on the network. And that allows people to have like a really nice, clean network of data. It's not wasteful. You're not like storing stuff that nobody wants per se.
Yeah.
And you are storing what people find is valuable. And then the power with that pinning that CID is like, I can take that CID and then pin it with another IPFS node as like a double pin.
Right.
I think of it like pictures on a fridge. You put a magnet on a picture on a fridge, it's going to hold that picture up. If I put two magnets on that fridge, if I take the other one off, it's persistent and it's able to stay there. And so you have this ability for communities to put content up. So in context of NFTs, that's like the most obvious, like, powerhouse of it. And it was really big during the NFT boom, 2021, 2022. But the power of IPFS is that, it can be used for loads of different stuff. And I think some things that we haven't seen yet. So the ones that you kind of already named, like DeFi, a lot of people use IPFS as a way to like cache certain transaction data or token information. Blockchain gaming use it a lot for like on-game assets and things like that. I think cases that are still experimental that we're still seeing is stuff that we did with with Cosmic Cowboys. We actually use IPFS to, of course, use it for the NFTs.
Yeah.
But we also use it for the AI embeddings, which is a really interesting concept where you have like this context that you need to give an AI engine, stored as an embedding. And then you have like this public kind of embedding that can be used with other AI agents or something like that. So that's like kind of really interesting cases out there. I think there's a lot in the public sector that we haven't explored yet either. That's really important with like, stuff that you need to make sure that it's insured correctly. So it'd be like mortgages or health data or all this different kinds of stuff that like you need to make sure it hasn't been altered or you have this assurance that it's not going to be altered.
Right.
If you can't store it on chain.
Totally.
So IPFS is interesting. It's definitely kind of limited in the scope of like blockchain for the most part. There's a lot of cases outside of blockchain, but they kind of go together because IPFS is like a way to have integrity of your data, even if you can't fit it directly on chain. That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that's always interested me about IPFS is actually what it stands for, which is InterPlanetary File System. Do you have any, since you work on this day to day, like what's the history of that? Where did that cool name come from?
It's interesting. I'd have to probably look up the exact origin of like where interplanetary. I think the concept is this idea of, it's the node structure. It's like this network of nodes rather than a centralized server.
Yeah.
That's the big thing that they push on their site is like, let's share data in a way that's not, just between you and one server. Let's share data collectively.
It's almost like the getting the species off planet to avoid existential demise. Right. So by being interplanetary, we can survive. It's
funny though, because I think last year they actually were able to put an IPFS node in space.
Oh, rad.
And so that's, so now they're like, okay, now we can actually say it's interplanetary. That was like a big joke.
Right on. Okay, so another thing that is on my mind is, and maybe you've come across this, I also use a service called NFT storage. But one problem I've had is that a lot of times the links are considered spam. And so like my Netgear router at home, I always get notifications like blocked malware. And it's just an IPFS link that like I created in my day-to-day work and loaded in a browser.
Right.
And I'm curious how much Pinata has encountered this issue of being flagged as spam. And is it just the gateway that the spam lists are looking at, or are they actually detecting the format of a CID and like even that can be considered spam?
It's definitely the gateway level.
Okay.
And it's usually on the domain level. So just like a website domain might be flagged as, harmful, IPFS gateways unfortunately go through this a lot.
Yeah.
There's been a huge surgence of people who try to use IPFS for phishing content, because since you can store any kind of content on IPFS, that includes websites, it includes malicious HTML forms or something like that with JavaScript. And it's definitely something we've encountered and had to combat. And so we have a lot of tricks that help prevent that. Something that's kind of helpful to understand too is like there are public gateways and then there are private gateways. So public gateway would be something like that NFT storage uses. You in theory can use any CID with that gateway and pull content through it. Another one is like IPFS.io/IPFS. That's a very big public gateway. Pinata has one. It's gateway.pinata.cloud. And those public gateways allow anybody to use and can just feed any CID they want through it and pull content from the network. Because the purpose of a gateway is to bridge the content that's on IPFS to HTTPS.
Right.
That's the link. And so the public gateways can usually get a lot of abuse because anybody can use them. And private gateways are tied to like maybe a provider. So Pinata is very big. One of our biggest services is private dedicated gateways where only you are using that gateway. It has dedicated speeds and all this other stuff.
Right.
And so our way of combating that a lot is we have a lot of control over both our public and our dedicated gateways. And so we have ways of flagging content if it like looks suspicious. Once we see it, we might, put a block on it. We've done things with our public gateway to like make phishing forms unusable.
Oh, nice.
And so even if you're able to get it through, that we had another campaign too, that basically if something looks suspicious, we'll just say, hey, this looks like phishing content and show a screen that says that. Yeah. And so it's a problem we've encountered definitely over the last 2 years, and it's become more increasing. It's gotten into news sources as well. It's like how big it is.
Yeah.
But I think over the last year or two, we've put a lot of time and effort into fixing that problem and blocking that stuff. And we actually reach out to a lot of these ISPs to try to get some of those domains unblocked. So it's like, hey, this is actually an okay link, and those other IPFS providers like NFT.storage, Web3 storage, IPFS Foundation in general, they've also done a lot of work to help combat that kind of stuff. Because it's an interesting situation where like IPFS is a decentralized network, but the way you access it, may not be. It's like you have central points like Pinata or NFT storage where like these are gated access points that you can kind of control. At any point, you can run your own IPFS zone and fetch whatever you want off the network. And I think that's the beauty of a lot of decentralized tech is this concept of open protocol, open network, but still controlled clients.
Yeah, totally.
It's like those clients, you can do what you want, but if you have the freedom, if you really wanted to go in the Wild West out there, you could. So
yeah. What do you guys at Pinata do to, and I'm not sure if you're in depth on this or not, but in terms of content moderation, is there anything that is like checking images to, scan for things that violate terms of service, whether it be like just pornography or drugs or illegal activity? What kind of stuff is in place for that?
So we have some stuff in place that's able to flag different types of content. But we're kind of working on improving that as well to do even more robust content moderation that's more dialed in and controlled. Right now, it's a bit general. And, I think we have some plans to make that more fine-tuned and maybe offer that as an option for people too. I think that's totally, a possibility. Can't promise that, but,
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough problem. Like Crossman also deals with this because we have a minting API, which is just a REST API and enables people to mint NFTs very easily. But the one thing that we have to be careful of is that people aren't minting things that, violate the TOS, or that we just don't want to be associated with, for whatever the case may be.
Yes.
Okay, let's switch it back to something hopefully a little happier. We've talked about, we've mentioned this phrase pinning a few times. Can you give a little bit of depth there? So what does that really mean? And if I want to pin something, what do I have to do to pull that off?
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of where Kenyatta steps in, is that's our real bread and butter. It's what we are called a pinning service. Mm-hmm. And so we basically make it easier for people to upload/pin content to IPFS and also retrieve it with the gateways. Traditionally, if you wanted to pin content, you'd have to be running your own IPFS node. Mm-hmm. And that has become a lot easier than it used to be. They even have a desktop client that you kind of spin up. Your computer will start using the resources and it'll, be able to access IPFS directly. Mm-hmm. But the downside is that when you're doing it in that way, it's not going to necessarily be fast or easy to retrieve, because you're just one node. And so, I can pin a file to my little IPFS node on my Raspberry Pi on my desk, and I could try to retrieve it from, another gateway or another service, but those services are going to be where is this thing? It's this tiny one node on Steve's desk. And that's where the power of pinning services come in, because we have a very large network of nodes and connectivity with other providers to allow really seamless transition of data, mm-hmm. as well as enabling things like caches on our nodes, as well as caches on the gateways. And so sometimes it's we find some content, we'll cache it, and then anytime you try to retrieve it ever again, it's going to be really fast,
for sure,
as long as that content stays pinned. As far as pinning in particular, what that is as a concept, I kind of went into a little bit, but it's just the process of serving that content from some kind of server, so it can be a Raspberry Pi, it can be a cloud server, it can be your own hardware server, and the software is saying, here's the content, if you need to get it, come get it, and basically keeping that content pinned. If it becomes unpinned, then what happens is, if no one else is pinning that content, as nodes start running garbage collection, it's going to slowly take it off those nodes.
Right.
It's still pretty persistent, and it's still pretty sticky, because, how often those nodes run garbage collection can differ from, what settings they have. Mm-hmm. And so content could disappear in a day, it could disappear in 2 weeks, it could be in a month if it's all unpinned. So it's really good at staying sticky, but also allows room to clean out the stuff that nobody wants.
Yeah.
Per se. So
I guess two questions. One, if I am using Kenyatta and I call the API and I say, mm-hmm. pin the CID for me, how is that do all Kenyatta nodes pin that so it's distributed, or what's the breadth of pinning a particular piece of content?
Yeah, that gets into some of the different implementations that IPFS can exist on. Mm-hmm. IPFS has, I think, 3 main implementations. One is just Kubo, which is the Go implementation of IPFS. That's what runs on my Raspberry Pi. Mm-hmm. We have a tutorial on that,
Nice.
If you want to link it, you can. It's a really fun one.
Okay.
And that one's really simple, but it's also maybe not the most scalable and not the most resource efficient. Mm-hmm. Then we have Helia, which is a JavaScript implementation that's designed to run client-side browsers. So that could be a very interesting use case if you want to just spin up IPFS for when someone's visiting a website for some purpose. You could do that. Also not the most effective. The more bigger one that's come up more recently and has been used a lot is Elastic IPFS.
Okay.
And that term probably sounds familiar, and it's basically specifically designed for cloud providers. Okay. And so it's a bit more complicated, but it scales much better and connects much more with IPFS nodes. So you kind of think of it one big web versus a bunch of individual nodes that Kenyatta has scattered places. That's the simplest I could probably put it for you.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. We have a blog post on that our CTO did as well. He goes over those 3 implementations and what's primarily used. And in short, Kenyatta uses a mix of, Kubo and Elastic. We have, different instances for different purposes, and, but primarily Elastic is how it's distributed and connected with, other providers and stuff.
Okay. Cool. Let's see. From here, I want to dig into a few just kind of miscellaneous issues I've run into, like getting used to IPFS over the last couple of years of getting comfortable with blockchain development. Yeah. So one of the first issues I ran into was trying to learn about NFTs. And so creating just a test NFT project, and like OpenZeppelin's implementation, when you call token URI, it gives you base URI / number. And, but when I'm working on my metadata files, they tend to have a .json extension. And so you can either override token URI so that you append to that, but it just kind of like bugged me. And so I went through and like, I wrote a script to remove the extension after I like created them. And then I wrote a script to remove the extension so that I could actually upload them in that way. So I'm curious if, if this is something you guys have come across, or any recommendations on, should I just like forget about it, override token URI and let the JSON be there? I'll leave it at that and see kind of what your reaction is.
Yeah. It's interesting because, it depends on a lot of different things. First thing it might depend on is how you're structuring your NFT project metadata. So if you are going to be using a folder structure that has the file path in there, then you kind of have to encounter that problem face one way through. Something that people do is like they just get the individual CID for each item that might be in a folder, and so there is no extension. It's just there's the CID. Right. So that's one solution. As far as the .json thing, yes, absolutely. It's hung lots of people up. I think the biggest challenge is that when it comes to creating NFTs and NFT smart contracts, there's so many different providers doing different things. You think about like how Crossmint does it versus how, what's that? Manifold is like another one. Like, these really big like launch platforms and like they're building these smart contracts. They might say, hey, leave the JSON in there.
Yeah, sure.
JSON. Yeah, there might be others. They say take the .json off. So like it really depends. We actually wrote like a help article to like say, hey, if you're having a problem with you, like here's how you can remove it if you need to. Yeah. But like giving clarity on that and like that's how you're going to handle these different cases. It's unfortunately I think one of the downsides too of just like having such a broad ecosystem and everybody doing anything differently is like you have someone new come in, like it gets really confusing really fast. And I think that's the power of like, when you abstract that from the user, it's like, what if we just, take that off their burden, off their shoulders and like, we'll just upload that content for them
for sure,
or something like that. But yeah, it's definitely a thing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm glad that I'm not the only one that encountered this and was frustrated at first.
I personally prefer just to remove the extensions if I need to, or just use direct CIDs.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. Because I like the idea of just being able to upload a folder and have everything in there. Can I upload a folder and get a unique CID per file? Okay, because I hadn't realized that.
What's interesting is it recursively handles that. So if you upload a folder, you'll get a top level CID for the folder and it's all of its contents. That's one cryptographic hash. But then everything in there is also getting the CID that it would get if it was uploaded individually.
Gotcha.
Which is really interesting. To see that play out too.
But then so that's interesting. So let's say I upload a folder with 10 files. And one .json gets its own CID. If I go and upload one .json elsewhere, not in a folder, I get the same CID, right?
For that one .json, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So then really the only disadvantage there is that I got to like the cost of mint is going to be higher because I'm storing more data for that particular token.
Right. Yeah. It would kind of depend on how you're mapping over those and putting them, in the contract and like how you're passing them in. It depends on the content too. So, for instance, I made one that basically takes social media posts on Farcaster, which is like a decentralized network, and just mints them as NFTs. And in that case, it's really easy to do because I'm passing in the token URI on every mint,
right?
Versus,
totally,
doing something different, so it just depends. Yeah,
for sure. Cool. Well, I learned something new. I didn't know that uploading a folder, I still got unique CIDs. Let's see. Okay. So I want to make sure that we have time to get into the DevRel stuff. So the last kind of dev focused question is, what is a feature of Kenyatta that you love or think is just way sick, but not enough people know about?
Ooh, man. I think probably one of them would be image optimizations.
Ooh,
so
okay.
a lot of developers will go through a whole lot of work to get like a CDN put on top of Pinata with the gateways and like do image optimizations through Cloudinary on top of it. Well, we have all that built in. And so like we have a CDN built into our gateways and we have image optimization. So you can basically add query parameters to your gateway URLs and get specific image sizes or,
quality
different
levels,
stuff like that. Right. And people do that all the time because you have these creators and bless them, they're so talented, but they'll make like a 20 megabyte file.
Totally.
And you're like, I can't load this on a website because there's like 100 of them.
Yeah.
And like, that's when you get into that stuff. And so it's all built in. And I think people could definitely check that out. It's a very popular use case.
That is really cool. So I can upload the 20 megabyte file, but then you guys do all of the work. Does it happen like on the fly? Like I add the query string and you're like, the backend optimizes it?
Yeah, just bam.
Dang, that's sick.
Yep, that's it.
It reminds me of one time.
And I believe I believe it'll cache that particular instance and size. So every time it's refetched, it's going to pull up that cache layer, which is great about IPFS. Since content's static and it's immutable, makes your cache rate insane.
Yeah, no, that's great. It reminds me of one time where we had a client of CrossMint and they're like, hey man, like people are minting this NFT and it's not playing. It was a video. They're like, it's not playing in your wallet. And I log in and I'm like, yeah, sure enough, it's not playing, and I kind of like go start checking some things in the database. And then all of a sudden it starts playing and I'm like, what? And I download the files like 600 megabytes. I'm like, well, yeah, it takes a second, bro. The other thing I was going to ask is, is there anything on the horizon or does this already exist for video optimization? Because that's a harder problem to solve.
It is much harder. And it's something, I don't know about video optimization. We did have for a short time, like video streaming and not video streaming in the sense of live streaming, but streaming the bits. So like you can
instead of downloading the entire
pull up
file.
the page and it exactly. So like we had that and I think some people used it, but I don't think it was enough for people to like really want it. I'd be interested to see if people like if we have some demand for video optimization or doing something like that. Definitely an interesting area to explore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So last question for the dev section. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of new Web3 devs. I see more new devs here than any development community I've ever been a part of. And just this morning I was on Farcaster and looking at the jobs channel. And I noticed a lot of devs, like younger guys expressing frustration, like, oh, it's so hard to get a job. And other people are like, yeah, you just got to like start your own company. It's easier. And I'm like, really? I'm getting hit up on LinkedIn every day, bro. Like,
right.
And so, but I've been doing this for a long time. And so experience helps with that kind of stuff. The question is, what is like a top recommendation that you'd share to a new dev who wants to get their first role in Web3 specifically?
Yes, absolutely. I think the biggest advice I would give them is write a blog.
Okay.
And continue building projects. I think those are easily the two biggest things you can do. I think on the writing side, I think it's really valuable because like anything else when you're writing, writing is an expression of how you think. And it helps you think. It helps you process what you might have internally, but you haven't actually sorted out completely. And so one of the things that I was doing when I was learning how to do, web development is I did keep like a very casual blog. It was nothing fancy. It was like, I look back now and I'm like, man, that was pretty, it felt bad. It's just like, this is not very valuable. Nobody's going to actually read this and be like, this is like super valuable information. And then that's not the point. The point is you're writing and showing your evolution as a developer and the way you think through problems. And I think that's really valuable. It shows other people like you're thinking through this stuff. And when I was like a prospect for Pinata, that was one of the things my boss looked at. And he was very much like, I saw you have a blog, and like we want someone who can help do some writing.
Yeah.
And he's a writer himself and has a similar background.
Cool.
And so I think the blog is huge. And then of course the projects. One of the things that I did pretty early on is I was doing some tutorials, and like tutorials can be helpful. But I was primarily enrolled in something called Build Space, which is a different thing now. It's more like an accelerator program now, but back in the day, they did primarily courses, but it wasn't exactly a course. They kind of like get you set up with like, here's like a place to start. And like, here's how you would normally solve a problem, but now go solve this problem with that information.
Nice.
And it pushed you just enough to like understand, I have to kind of like build this, and they kind of encourage your creativity. It's like, okay, you've done like the very bare minimum, but like, what if you wanted to do this? How would you do that? And I think it allowed people to be more creative with what they built. And by doing so, you're able to move out of the tutorial circle into like the build thing. Because the biggest thing you can understand as a developer is like 9 times out of 10, like you're going to be able to find the information on how to do something out there. You just need to have the drive to go do it. It's like, have an idea that like you really like, and you're like, I really want to see this happen, or I want to make this a reality, and not just like, oh, I can make a calculator because there's 100 tutorials on YouTube on how to make a calculator. Yeah. It's like, no. Think outside the box, So like one of the projects I did that was really simple. It wasn't that crazy. It was like, basically buy me a coffee, but with crypto, and having like a page where like that happens. And I think other people have done it before already. It wasn't that much revolutionary, but that practice of like going through that and building the website, building the back end with the smart contracts, it's super valuable. Just those two things.
Yeah, I would completely back that up. I say the same thing too. Tutorials are great because, you can, it's kind of like the metaphor I'd use is, we got this app recently for our kids named Simply Piano, like to learn piano. And I think what it's really good at is making you feel like you're playing piano before you actually are, because it kind of accompanies you and like it's great in that sense. So you get that initial, like, almost dopamine hit of like, oh, I did it, like I'm doing it. Yeah. And so tutorials are great for that. Like you can sit down and watch a YouTube video for 30 minutes or a few hours and build something and be like, wow, in the back of your mind, you didn't really do it, but it's a good step. Right. But then what you said, pick a project that you give a shit about and build it. And then you learn how to solve problems. It's because being a developer is not just about following directions. You're an engineer. Exactly. Like you have to solve problems, and that's the best way to figure it out. So I love your answer.
Yeah, totally agree. And don't be afraid to Google,
totally. ChatGPT is so helpful now.
It's helpful. And like, I think the only thing I would like bait as a warning is just like, if you're going to copy and paste something, figure out why it works.
Yeah, sure.
Like ask the follow-up question, like, why does that work? Because it's very easy to like just copy and paste something and call yourself an engineer. But it's definitely a lot more than that. But like, yeah, it's like every problem that someone has solved, it's on the back of someone else who solved a similar problem. Yeah. Or maybe something close to it. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, so that wraps up the developer focus section of the episode. And now we're going to transition to talk about DevRel. I am super stoked about this because I'm currently head of developer relations at CrossMint, and I love it. It's a role that I've wanted for a long time. And like I said already, my background software engineering. And so I'm really strong technically. Like I love that stuff, but there are some aspects of DevRel that don't come as naturally to me. And so I'm excited to interview people like you and basically ask all my questions and treat all of you as my mentors. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm stoked.
Yeah. The first question I have is actually more of like a Pinata question, like a company question. And that is, and I don't know how much you can share or go into depth here, but I'm curious, like internally, how much you guys or how you think about competitors in this space. What's kind of your perspective or like feeling about them?
I think a lot of the time, while they are competitors, they are contributing to IPFS in the space. And I think that's our biggest, context is like, we're all working together to make IPFS accessible and popular. Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing. I think in terms of marketing and figuring that stuff out, I think it's a kind of a challenging question. I think the biggest thing that we've always had as a company culture is like, don't get too hung up thinking about competition. It's more so like focusing on like, what is Pinata doing? What are we doing to excel? What are the things that we're building? I think it's very easy to get stuck in a rabbit hole when you start comparing yourself with competitors and like thinking too much, because what happens in that space is you can lose some of your individuality and like how you're solving problems. It's like, this competitor's doing this, that means we have to do it too. It's like, no, not necessarily. It's like, why did they do that? It's interesting to think about, but like, does that make sense for us? Like, we need to make decisions independent of like how other people are making those decisions. And that applies to like product, it applies to marketing, it applies to all this different stuff that I think that's, as a company, that's what we've kind of embraced the most.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I appreciate that. Let's see. Right up next, let me move this question to the top of my list here. Let's see. Okay, yeah. What are some of the top ROI activities for a DevRel? Like, there's a lot of options. There's YouTube videos, docs, tutorials, blog posts, Discord in the community, personal Twitter, company Twitter, and I'm leaving several out. But with all of the things that kind of come to the top of your mind of where a DevRel and a DevRel department can focus their energy, what are the things that you see the highest ROI from?
Yeah, it's hard to gauge that too, because depending on how your stuff is set up, it can be hard to gauge those numbers. And I think the biggest challenging with stuff like that is everyone's different. Totally. And every company is like defining like what success looks like, or defining what those returns look like. I think personally, probably some of the biggest ones is like documentation, and then the experience of the product, and then one that I think is not as popular, but is dedicating time to support and actually talking to users. What's really interesting about Pinata and my particular role is I started out as a community manager for Pinata.
Okay.
And so my main role is, we were like, I think 10 people at the time. I was like the 10th hire. And Justin, who was my boss, he was the third hire, apart from the founder and he was like the first hire, the guy that came on board. He's like, I need to focus on product, but I'm spending all my time doing support. I need you to come in and like talk to these people. My previous job, I basically led a customer service unit at a local bank.
Okay.
And so I was like, customer support, I'm good. Like, I solve problems, and like I've been doing dev stuff, I've been learning and teaching myself this on the side. And so it was a perfect fit. And I think one of the biggest things that impacted me is like our CEO, Kyle, was like, Steve, you have one of the most important jobs, because like, if we don't listen to our customers, then we're done. And I think that is a really interesting thing that plays into the DevRel scene. A lot of DevRels like hate the concept of like support being part of DevRel. But I think if you're going to be working with developers, it is like, I think one of the biggest things you can do, because if you're talking to these people every day and you get to hear all the problems, you get the best feedback to give to your team as far as what needs to be fixed. And also feeds into what you need to fix in your documentation. It lets you know what are you not educating them well on, and like what parts of the product are unclear. It's huge. It's like such a huge piece of information. So I honestly, that's probably like the biggest one is, investing your time and talking to people in any way that looks like. It could be at conferences, it could be, at all this other stuff, but like, it's never going to be as raw as just good old fashioned customer support. Yeah, that's where you're going to hear everything.
I like that. And I think the beauty of working directly with developers, and I do this a lot right now, like I'm always in Discord answering dev questions, and it helps you break through the curse of knowledge. Because when you really understand how your product works, it's so easy to just think like, duh.
Oh, why don't they just do that?
Which is why I think sometimes engineers can really, really struggle with writing documentation, because they wrote the product. So they only know how to use it correctly.
Right. Exactly.
So I love the answer. And the way like we think about this a little bit at CrossMint is what we call this kind of like table stakes. Like, you got to have a good product. You got to have good documentation. And I hadn't realized this, but I think developer support is another part of this, like table stakes. And so this leads into my next question, which is like the sequence that one should follow. So say you have a company that they're making their first DevRel hire. They know that they're lacking and they want to do it. Where do you recommend that person starts? And let's say they start with table stake stuff. Actually, let's hear you talk through it rather than me prescript.
Sure. No, yeah. I think first thing, like, for instance, like if I was going to be going into a different DevRel position, different company, it's like the first DevRel that they're hiring. I think the first thing I would do is just try the product myself and just get my first impressions of it.
100%.
A lot of the time, that those DevRels have never used that product, and so they have no idea what they're getting into and what that product is. So just going through it, looking at the documentation, and just feeling that experience that you have, that developer experience from the get-go.
Yeah.
See what that's like. That's going to feed into your main things as you go into next. And then next, I would probably just throw them in support. That is like a huge thing. The people that I've hired and like taught under me, so like our current community manager, same thing, like put them in support. And like support is going to let you learn the product faster than anything else.
Totally.
Because people are going to have all the questions. You're going to find all the different pieces of it. When I worked in the bank, what was interesting about that role is that it wasn't segmented support. They didn't have enough like people to do that.
Yeah.
Like it was support for everything.
Totally.
Like it was support for the lady that wants her balance, the person whose card was declined, the guy who can't get into his online banking, and like the bankers having a question about something, the system, and the people with the loans. It was like everything. And my boss at the bank was like, the best thing about this position is that you're going to know everything. And I did. Like I ended up like
totally
knowing everything. And I think that same thing applies to when you're being thrown into like a new DevRel position. You're like trying to figure out what's the first thing to work on, because if you do those things, you'll probably have a good gauge of like what needs to be fixed first. Is it like, is it the docs? Is it the support not good enough? Is it, X, Y, and Z? And I think that helps feed into, your decisions about like what videos do I maybe need to film if there's no videos on this subject, or like what's going to be the most helpful for people to understand, or just giving feedback to like, hey, we need to rethink this product because it's just not good.
Sure.
It's like, that happens too, like, and hopefully you have a company that values that realness. For sure. That was the one thing I was blessed with Pinata is like, something Kyle, like us again, talked about all the time was the coefficient of fiction. And that's the concept of, it's very easy for a company to become in a spot where, just like you said, you just kind of say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. And it's like, once you buy into that and you're no longer listening and you're just in an echo chamber, you're not going to change and you're going to become stagnant. And it's a refreshing place to be. And hopefully other people see it that way too. So
definitely. Yeah, that's a great answer. I like that. So now let's imagine sort of the table stakes out of the way. The documentation is pretty solid. The product itself, like the SDK, it's been well thought through. It's gone through a few iterations. It works reliably. And we have developer support in place. And now we're looking to like really kind of take it to the next level. Where do you go from there? What do you think is a good place to start? And I know the answer is different for every company and every product, but from your perspective, where's a good place to start?
I think content is probably going to be the big one. And probably specifically either blog posts or videos. Pinata has had a really rich history in blog posts. Videos is something that's still a bit more recent. That started up when I started working and started getting into video stuff. And it's funny how that started, because when I first joined, like within the first month, Kyle was like, I want you to do like a video every week for the company about like what's happening in the community. I'm like, all right. So I like start with my MacBook camera and like took it from there, and I learned all this video stuff. So content I think is huge. Pinata has had a rich history of blog posts that have kind of been shared and used in lots of different places. Because when Matt and Kyle were first starting out, they were just writing about IPFS, because IPFS was nothing back then. Pinata was like this tiny company, and like they started in 2018 and didn't really grow until 2021.
Wow.
And so they had like this 3 years of just like they're building, they're making a service, making an API. They have a very small user base, but they're writing a lot. And like these blog posts became really fundamental to like Kenyatta being like the basic decision for IPFS when you're building Web3.
Totally.
It's what helped put us in documentation across different spaces and different tools. And I think having good content like that is huge, helps your SEO, especially written content. So probably blog content, and then maybe videos. And then from there, probably exploring, just kind of the other DevRel stuff that you normally do. So like going to conferences, talking to developers more, going to places like Farcaster, I think are huge. Being in networks that like other developers are in and really talking, and not necessarily like shoving marketing material in their faces, but really talking to them and understanding like, hey, you have this problem. Why aren't you using IPFS? Why aren't you doing this? And like hearing their frustrations or hearing what problems they're having. I think just a mix of those is probably what I would do next.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Kind of a sidebar, but I'm curious if you know when they came up with the name Kenyatta, because it's got to be one of the best names in Web3.
Yeah. Thank you. We appreciate it. It was at the foundation of the company. The way Kenyatta started is Matt and Kyle were both in Omaha, Nebraska. They, I think I remember correctly, either Kyle, one of them put up a thing online saying, hey, we have a blockchain club in Omaha, Nebraska. I think it was Matt.
Okay.
And Kyle was like getting into blockchain. He's like, I want to be there. He goes and it's just Matt. Nobody else shows up.
Totally.
They start going through stuff and like work and just we're building on blockchain. Really, they were playing with NFTs when they were first getting started and like experimenting. Came across that problem of content manipulation and those things. Came across IPFS' solution, and we're very early on like, let's make IPFS easier, because we just tried to use IPFS and it was the worst thing we've ever been through. And so it's like, let's make this easy to use, scalable, and efficient. And so that's what started. They ended up going to ETH Berlin in 2018 with this idea of a pinning service of Kenyatta. And they kind of came up with the name because, when you pin something.
It sounds a pin. Yeah. The word pin.
Putting you're pinning. Yeah. I think they were at first at one point they were thinking pinwheel, and they're just like, I think the domain was taken or something like that.
Yeah.
And they're like,
it always comes back down to domain availability.
Yeah. So Kenyatta.cloud, that's what they picked. And it's been great. Kyle made this Penny, our mascot, all the way back then in like some paint program, and it stuck.
That's so cool. One of the first devs at CrossMint, Max, actually created our logo. And like,
oh, nice.
He's a hardcore dev.
Awesome.
Like I was just talking to him this morning. He's so sharp.
It's a great logo.
And, when I found out Max created it, I was like, that's so cool, man. I love it.
Love it. It's a good logo. I love your logo.
Thanks, man. Same to you guys. Let's, okay. So I want to dig into the YouTube videos, because I think you guys do a great job. So where to start? Thanks. Let's start with like the first thing I see when I go to YouTube, which is these really great thumbnails with like a nice background and a picture of you or Lindsay making kind of a funny face. So the first question I have is like, the funny face pictures, like, how do you get yourself to do that? And do you just take a whole bunch one day and then like you have them ready for later? Or what is this process like?
That's basically it. It's funny too, because that's a bit of like the marketing side that like our marketing team kind of pushed me to do. And I didn't really want to do it. And then I was like, this makes sense. I got to do it. So a lot of those, like I just had the camera set up, had the self timer, and I was just snapping photos of myself and was trying to think like, what do YouTube people do? And like, you think of when you see YouTube thumbnails, I mean, like they are a little exaggerated. They're a little crazy. They're like doing stuff just like, whoa. And it's very hard to make yourself do that. You feel like a complete idiot. But like, I think statistically having a face on a thumbnail will get you better results than if you don't.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's a pretty obvious thing. And we have like a pretty nice system where our designers were like, hey, instead of us making you a thumbnail every week, which is going to slow things down, let's get you set up in Figma with like the building blocks and you just make your own.
Nice.
And so we basically have like a bunch of different backgrounds, a bunch of different cutout photos of ourselves, and then little assets. And so all we have to do is just go in there, edit the text, edit the background, add some fun things. And it's just a matter of cycling through it and maybe eventually refreshing some of that content, those assets and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the process. And like every now, like I've reused quite a few now. And so I have to start taking some more. I like trying to get in the habit of remembering to like take a photo when I'm filming. So like it fits the context of the video.
Or whatever.
I can think through it more. I can think through like, what's this video about? What face am I going to make, I guess.
Totally.
Yeah. And like the Final Cut Pro, the software I use for video editing, has a pretty nice feature where you can export an individual frame. So if like I'm just scrolling through and I see like a pretty decent frame, I'll just like snag that, remove the background and clean up a little bit and then throw that into our file and everything. So
awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for confirming that it is awkward and you do it anyway. Now let's dig into the software you use. So it sounds like you do edit the videos yourself. Just let me know when I'm back.
Could you repeat that? I froze up for a second, so I missed something.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, you're back. Yeah, okay. Try that again.
Yeah. It sounds like you do edit the videos yourself because you said you're using Final Cut.
Yes.
Okay. So that was one of my questions. Like, do you edit them all or do you guys have like a team? You just give them all the assets and they edit it for you?
So, Lindsay and I both do our individual editing. Nice. So when I was teaching myself the video stuff, I essentially was doing the community updates, was using iMovie, and there was after like a month or two, Kyle was like, I think you need to make these more interesting. I was like, oof, okay, man, okay, I'm on it. And so I was like, give me a little bit of a budget to like get some stuff that I know will help. Because like I thought of like what helps YouTube videos do stuff. And it's like the ability to cut quickly and like make short takes and like do all this stuff. There's like in my mind, I could see what people were doing video editing wise. And I just couldn't really do it in iMovie.
Yeah.
So got Final Cut Pro, got the trial first, which was nice. It's like 90 days, gives you lots of time to learn it and figure out if it's going to work.
Okay.
And so just started using that and just slowly taught myself how to use it and how to edit videos and make a flow for like creating new projects. And then when we brought on Lindsay and she started doing videos, I just because she's actually has a background in streaming on Twitch.
Okay.
So pretty natural for her to do like some video work, but not like editing. So I just showed her. I was just like, here, let's get into Final Cut Pro. I'll show you what I do. And she's basically just kind of followed the same thing and maybe puts her own spin on things. She's kind of surprised me here and there with like adding in like a cool thing. I'm like, oh, that was really nice. I might steal that, And so we both individually work on editing our videos. I think we want to get some more people from our company in their faces on videos too. And in those cases, I'll probably just edit it for them just so they don't have to worry about it. It's like, this is part of my job. If you're making me a video, like that's a nice bonus and totally get it. You got other stuff to do, but yeah, all self-taught. We're very bootstrapped in a lot of ways in the sense of, things that we kind of get, taken up upon us, or like if we just take it up ourselves as far as responsibility, it's very much just like figure it out and just learn it, whatever it takes to do that. That's kind of how we roll.
Totally. I noticed, I watched the How to Mint an NFT on Base video this morning, and it looked like you're using an app called Screen Studio. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it.
Nice.
Oh, so great.
Yeah, we just got a membership or license to that recently too, and it's really good.
It's so good. And I've kind of like done, I think we got that sometime last year because I saw some people using it. I was like, I need to figure out what that is because I want it. That is like great for product demos and like the ability to export in, GIFs or full res video. It's so powerful. And it's a pretty impressive because that's like a guy. It's just one guy who's making it.
Wow.
And is making updates as much as he can. It's like, it's very impressive for like just a one-man show trying to keep it running.
Definitely. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So do you then record in Screen Studio, but import into Final Cut for like the final production?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I sure do. And the flow has kind of changed over the year or two, and I've kind of figured out different ways to do different things. When it comes to video content, I think one of the harder challenges is figuring out like what flow you're going to do. So like for right now, I'm filming off of my iPhone.
Oh, interesting.
With the video we're on right now, I'm using the iPhone as a webcam, and like that camera's really great for webcam stuff. This camera that I use for all my videos, it's a Fuji X-E4. Like it doesn't have built-in like plug-in USB and then you turn it into a web camera. I have to use a capture card.
Yeah.
The capture card is not great. It just like, and so like when I try to use that directly into Screen Studio, then I'm getting like raw footage. And so I'm actually using OBS to like add in, a LUT to like change the color profile and then feed that into it. Just gets out of hand. Totally. So recently I've started doing Screen Studio. I'll film the video up top. I'll record audio on my computer with a off-standing microphone, and like with something like QuickTime. It's great for just recording audio. And then if I have Screen Studio, I'll pull that up and just not have video in there. And I'll record the audio on Screen Studio. And with Final Cut Pro, you can basically take all three of those clips, your A footage, your B footage, and then your audio, and sync all of them according to audio, and then open it up and cut what you want. So that's been my most recent flow, is doing that and then applying masks to bring my face down in the low bottom right and stuff like that. There's kind of like a lot of tricks you can kind of slowly develop and learn of like the easiest way to get something out quickly if you need to.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Have you experimented with Adobe Premiere at all, or just went straight to Final Cut?
Ooh, I went straight to Final Cut, mostly because I have a pretty extensive background in photography and have used Lightroom and Photoshop a lot, and I do not like how they perform on Mac.
Okay, gotcha.
And I was just terrified. I think I might have tried Premiere, and I was just like, and it was also like I think Premiere's like still a monthly subscription versus Mac was just like a one-time purchase, and I was kind of like, I kind of like the idea of a one-time purchase, and I haven't looked back since. It's been really good.
Okay, cool.
But reach their own. I think Premiere, for some people probably works great.
Yeah, I mean, I already have a cloud subscription, so like I'm using that.
Right.
But I also don't love it sometimes. What about two questions? I'll say them both out loud so you can help me remember in case I forget one. Have you found a length that you think works best for not just engagement, but also just actual value for the developer? And then the other part is, how much prep do you do beforehand? Like, do you write out a script, or you just kind of like go through what you want to do a few times and then like do it and record it?
So regards to your first question, you said a link between
length.
What's going to help the developer? Oh, the length.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I thought I just heard length. Yeah, length. I think it kind of depends on the project. I try to keep it short as possible. Yeah. Shorter the better, in my opinion. Okay. But without cutting too much out and making it unhelpful. So like, for instance, I just did a video and released it this morning on our newest feature, Workspaces, which is like basically the ability to have teams within one project and stuff like that. And that was like a really easy 2-minute video. There's no need to really extract that. I have another tutorial on how to set up an IPFS node or set up a gateway on DigitalOcean. Like that showed that process. And that's like a 20-minute video.
Totally.
So as far as length, it just really depends on what's going to be more helpful for developers. Something that I haven't done much, but I think I'm going to start pushing into more because I like this philosophy, is if it is like a coding tutorial, not cutting out the bugs. So like, I think as content creators, it's very easy for us to like come across a bug and we're like, wait, why have you just freeze? And you're like trying to fix it, and you go back and you just like cut that whole thing out, and you're just like, I never actually encountered any bugs in this tutorial. Like I just did it 100%. And one of the guys that I watched a lot when I was learning to do web development, his name's Ed. I think his website's developed by Ed. Okay. Pretty popular programming YouTuber, does some pretty simple stuff, but he always showed the bugs. Yeah. He always showed the problems he had. And I always appreciated that when I watched it. I was like, I don't know why I don't do that, because it shows what the actual experience is like, but also like, working through problems and solving bugs is good for developers when they're watching it, because they might also encounter it, or, it helps understand the process of doing engineering work. So, if that makes the videos really long, that's what it takes. But like, I do try to like cut them and cut out the stuff that's not necessary. So like, for instance, if I'm doing something, I'm waiting for a file to upload or I'm waiting for something to render, I'm going to cut that out. Like, there's no point in making them stick around and wait and doing a complete uncut video. That makes sense. In regards to your second question, as far as prep, the benefit we have to some extent is we're very heavy on blog writing, and we have almost everyone in our company writing content for us. So typically if we do a video on it, it might be someone already wrote a blog post on it. We could just reference that and go through it, maybe touch it up a little bit. And if I'm doing something where I know for a fact I'm going to have a blog post and a video, I usually do the blog post first, publish that, and then I'll go make the video because I have something to work off of. I think that's been the best flow for me. And I haven't really had many instances where I have something where like I don't have a blog post already of some kind of writing that acts as an outline. And then from there, depending on what the subject, I usually do a run through just without camera and just be like, I pretend as if I'm talking to camera, see if I come into any problems, figure those out. Then, maybe film just a couple minutes and make sure that like you don't have any other issues, like your audio is not jacked up. I've done that before. Like I filmed like a 30-minute video and I realized like, oh my goodness, like this screen wasn't it was like a different screen I was recording. Like just wasted all that time. So like it's the worst. Like definitely check beforehand. Like just like do a little quick check. Like, okay, we're good. And then just working through it. I think some of those other oddity videos like workspaces, that's like a really one that was like, just do screen capture. I think through what we're going to have to do. If it's more complicated, definitely helps to have a script to go off of and to reference. Because for instance, for the one that I was doing on how to set up a gateway on DigitalOcean, it's a lot of server work. I'm in the terminal, pasting a lot of random commands and editing config files and all this other stuff. It's really nice to have that on the side. If you have an extra monitor or something, and copy that text or reference it. And like, if you have to take a moment and look at it, you can cut that out, that's fine. So it gives you that kind of freedom if you have a robust thing to go through. And as far as script versus outline, I will say this, Lindsay is not someone who likes to work off an outline. I do. So like, I generally don't write a word for word script. She does because she works better that way. And so for people who are trying to figure that out, definitely try both and see what kind of works best for you. Everyone's different and it'll look different too. So
totally. That's great feedback and advice on those things. Let's transition then from videos a little bit. And thanks for sharing your workflow there. That's super helpful just to get some insight.
Oh yeah, no problem.
And to see what I'm doing right and what I could do differently. A little bit different. We'll wrap this up pretty soon because we're almost out of time. Conferences. I'm curious what your own personal perspective and that of Kenyatta's is about conference attendance. Like, how do you make the most out of a conference and make sure that it's really like, worth going there? But also, do you attempt to measure anything like objectively, like this was a good attendance or not?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because in the past, we've done lots of sponsoring and tables and stuff like that. And for some conferences, we might still do that. It just kind of depends. But we had like a period where we were putting a lot of money into attending things that were kind of more creator focused and not necessarily developer focused. And I think since then, we've kind of refocused and like, we need to really focus on developers. And so we're going to go to hackathons.
Totally.
If we can easily sponsor the hackathon and be like, make some challenges and people win some stuff for doing that, we're probably going to put that money in there. But if not, we're just going to attend as hackers. We find our presence of just like being there at the conference, hacking away and having a Pinata shirt. People are going to come to you and say stuff. And people might ask, which stuff. And that's the nice thing with being Pinata is like, we are a familiar face in the space. And so a lot of people were like, oh yeah, I remember like I used Pinata like to do my first NFT and I haven't touched since then. What's it doing now? I'm a developer. I'm hacking now. This is totally different from when I first did it. So our biggest focus is just being there and probably building something. And then talking to people on the ground floor. Because if you have a table, people might come over if you have cool swag or something like that. And, sometimes, we've tried to do that and then like it works. It's cool. And like you tell people who Pinata is or whatever. But I think you'll probably do much better if you're on the ground hacking with everybody, and it's in a dingy room and everybody smells and you haven't slept in for 8 hours. That's our grind. We love hackathons. So we'll be at ETH Denver this year.
Nice.
Doing exactly that.
Cool. So, yeah, I'm going to be there too, so I'll come track you down, man.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, so you mentioned swag. What about that? Can I get some? And and also just like, what's kind of the do you feel like that's been useful or kind of meh, like bringing swag to conferences?
Yeah, kind of depends. Answer first question, send me your address, we'll get you a hat.
All right.
We got lots of hats right now. We're working on redoing some of our swag. A lot of it's old, but we had like a lot of hats.
Okay, sweet.
And yeah, swag is something we've always kind of experimented with. I think if anything, us internal employees love it the most. And so like, we always want to have like, you know, hey, like we should get some new stuff. And so like Marge, our, you know, head of design, I think she's working on some swag for our annual retreat that we'll have soon in March.
Nice.
And so I think sometimes we keep the best swag for ourselves. As far as what to bring to conferences, it really just depends, and like depends where it's at and what the challenge is. So like, for instance, one of our favorite hackathons that we've sponsored for, I think 2 years in a row now is Hack Midwest. Okay. And it's in Kansas City. And so it's like an hour or so from Omaha. It's all Web 2. Like there's no Web 3 people there. But Kyle loves that because he's like, we're from Omaha.
Yeah.
We're under the radar. That's how we've always flown. I don't want to necessarily go to New York and California. I want to like be here with these people. And it's been awesome because like you get to see people who never touched blockchain build something absolutely amazing and go for 6551 and use IPFS in interesting ways. You'll get like, it's cool. The best. So definitely recommend that. But, you know, in that case, it's like, cool. Kyle can drive a bunch of shirts in his car from Omaha to Kansas City.
Totally.
Easy. Flying shirts to Berlin.
Different.
Whole other issue. And like, I went through that last year. We were at ETH Berlin last year and we had a bunch of merch shipped over there. And like it was stored in one of the buildings. It was stored at the hotel, and another sponsor to the hackathon accidentally took our box instead of theirs. They had their boxes too. Got mixed up. They grabbed their boxes. We had to go on like a scooter adventure to like go to their event that wasn't at the main building, some other building in Berlin, and like find our t-shirts. It's like it just depends. And like easy swag is probably better, and like I think the more creative you can get, the better. Sometimes a classic t-shirt or hat, you can't really beat it. It's great. And, you know, if you don't have to spend too much money, go for it. Stickers are always really fun. I think one of my favorite ones, I don't have them. I don't think I have any with me. I'd have to look, is we had some business cards made that had multiple different designs of like Kenyatta on them. And so it was like some interesting graphic on the back. And I just like, I'll put those on the table. It's just my card.
Totally.
But like people were just grabbing them and it's like, wow, this is like easy, free advertisement, you know, and people can always reach out to me if they want to. But yeah, it depends for everybody and your prices, your price points, and like if it's really going to be worth it. I think having some kind of presence like that is really helpful. And what we've seen too is like if you kind of make it available, people will post about it on like social media years later. Like there'll be a person like, here's my Pinata shirt from 2019 or something like that. And it's just like, that's crazy, you know? And so sometimes it pays off, but you know, you just gotta balance it, and hopefully you can handle what you're going to be carried over there.
All right.
T-shirts are a lot.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
So, yeah.
All right, man, let's wrap it up. I got one last.
Cool.
Well, actually, before my last question, I always like to ask, is there anything that you maybe hoped we would cover and we just didn't talk about? Anything you want to shout out or something like that?
Not necessarily. I mean, if I wanted to do a quick plug, check out Pinata. We have a great free plan. It basically gives you all of the features of the paid plan, including dedicated gateways. You're just limited in how much you can use, so it's a great experience.
And it's quite a bit.
Our goal is just to... Yeah. It's like a good bit of stuff. Like, and like our paid plans are now, we've made a lot of changes to make sure we're focused on developers. So, we switched to usage-based pricing, and we'll have billing control soon. So basically you can have like a base price. And if you have to go over it, you just pay per usage.
Nice.
We've made some pretty generous limits there, added workspaces. our goal is just to make IPFS easy, and it's been cool to see more developers as the Web3 boom is starting to kick back up a little bit. We're starting to get a little bit of a bull market. More and more people, making interesting stuff, whether it's clients for Farcaster or, bounty reward programs. There's so many cool projects and there's so much stuff you can do with IPFS. So, check us out, Kenyatta.cloud.
Nice.
That's my plug.
And Cosmic Cowboys too.
Yeah, cosmiccowboys.cloud. We use cloud in everything.
Right.
So cosmiccowboys.cloud, it's public beta. You can test it out right now. We have a Telegram group as well. So we can maybe link that below if people are interested. And we're trying to use that for feedback. Mainnet's coming soon. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Okay, so it is going mainnet. It's not just like a little demo project.
That's the goal. We'll see what happens.
Awesome.
It's going to be interesting. It's a big bumpy ride going to mainnet, but I think we're going to do it.
Which chain are you going to go with?
Oh, we're going on Base.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, Base. We've really enjoyed Base for a lot of different things, and it's proven to be a pretty substantial chain, and we've seen a lot of really cool stuff come out of it.
Cool.
So I think that's what we're going to be pushing on.
Nice. Yeah. All right. Then last thing I want to ask you is, in your opinion, this is all Steve, why is DevRel one of the most exciting, impactful, and fun roles to play in this space?
Absolutely. For me, I think DevRel is one of the more exciting jobs because you get to do a little bit of everything. You get to do some of the engineering work without actually being an engineer and being stuck in Jira and all that stuff. You actually get to build really cool projects and experiment with how you could use it to stuff, building developer tools, and there's nothing more exciting than I build something, people use it and they find it helpful, and it's such a good high. I love it.
Cool.
You get to write content, you get to be very diverse in all the different things you do in the company, and it basically allows you to have a lot of freedom with how you interact with product and with developer stuff.
Totally.
So it's great. That's what I would say.
Cool, man. Yeah, I love it as well. So for anybody else out there listening that's thinking about getting into DevRel or already in it, let's talk. Yeah. So Steve, man, thanks for your time. This was so cool. I learned about IPFS. I learned more about Cosmic Cowboys, and I learned a lot more about DevRel, which is exciting to me because a big part of this podcast is figuring out how I can be the best DevRel I can be.
Yeah, dude, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad we kind of connected and made this happen. It's been a great time.
For sure.